Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the beautiful Encyon Theater here in Maitland, Florida, and the 21st Annual Florida Film Festival. We're here. My name is Jeff Sperry. I am the Director of Development here at Encyon, and privileged to be that, and we are delighted to welcome you to our home here, Encyon Theater. We are also delighted to welcome you to the Screenwriting Forum, the Agony and the Ecstasy of the Screenwriter in today's Hollywood. And today we have for your listening and question-asking pleasure four acclaimed, prominent, and accomplished screenwriters in their own right in various stages of their careers. And I think that's what's going to make this a particularly interesting presentation for you as you see the various perspectives that these gentlemen have. I do have a couple of remarks to make beforehand, though, and that is, first of all, to remind you that Encyon is your community, nonprofit community cinema. And we are grateful for the support of many of our friends in the community and beyond, but particularly our primary sponsor for the Florida Film Festival, once again, Full Sail University. So thank you very much, Full Sail, for your support. Let's give them a hand. They've been with us for 15 years and primary sponsor for 9, and we're ever so grateful, honestly, for their support. We couldn't do it without them. We also couldn't do it without you, our audience, and we're grateful for your support of our mission to bring the best independent and foreign film to Central Florida year-round. That's right. The festival is just part of what we do, so we would like to see you back here enjoying our films and our programs throughout the year. Now, our annual campaign is underway, and that's one way that you can support what we do here at Encyon. And each of you probably have there at your tables or nearby one of these nice little table tents with the forms in them. These are the campaign forms that will allow you to support the arts in Central Florida through United Arts and designate your support to Encyon. Your donation is completely tax deductible, and if you make it by April 30th, United Arts will match it by 15%. Donation forms are available on your tables, and if you don't get one today, you can check them out anywhere you can buy tickets or online at encyon.org. Now, another way you can support independent film and receive year-round benefits is to become a member of Encyon's Film Society. Membership forms are also available wherever you can buy tickets or online at encyon.org. And also, you're going to, if you're around the festival at all this week, you're going to be encounter surveys that are done by United Arts. And we ask if you have an opportunity to fill out one of these surveys that you please do so. These are very important to us in terms of securing grants. It allows us to track demographic information about our attendance and makes our programs better to know what it is that you're interested in and what it is that you're looking for. So thank you in advance for that. We also want to welcome viewers watching at home and at their offices and wherever they may be live streaming today, thanks to our friends at Orlando Live. The live stream is available at floridafilmfestival.com as well as orlandolivestreaming.com. So in order to facilitate the live streaming, when we do get to the question and answer and comment section, we ask that you raise your hand and you'll be, a microphone will be brought to you by one of Orlando Live's folks there, and you can just speak into the mic, and that way the panelists will hear you and everybody else will hear you, and the folks watching on live streaming will hear you. So without further ado, it's my pleasure once again to welcome you and to introduce our panel and to begin the discussion. Our moderator for today is UCF film professor and tremendously acclaimed screenwriter in his own right, Barry Sandler. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Well, welcome. Good to see everybody. I'm glad to see there's so many screenwriters in the audience or who are interested in screenwriting. And we have three very renowned writers here with us today to hopefully shed some enlightenment and knowledge for all of you. Let me introduce them, and then we'll start off with a few general questions and the responses, and then we'll open it up to the audience. But directly to my left is, I'll go down the list in order, is Mike Werb. Mike and Don, by the way, are very old and close friends of mine, so I'm thrilled that they're here. And Justin also is a good friend and former student of mine. Mike has written a number of films, including Food of the Gods 2, The Mask with Jim Carrey, which I know you all know and love, Face Off, Lara Croft Tomb Raider, Curious George. He has also written and produced television series like Tarzan and Unnatural History, which was on just in 2010, I guess it was. Firehouse Dog, Recently, he's worked on scripts of Collateral Damage, the Schwarzenegger film, and Black Sheep, the Chris Farley film. So that's quite a star list of credits. Next to Mike is Don Mancini, who is renowned for writing and creating and writing all of the Chucky movies, starting with Child's Play, and then on to Child's Play 2 and Child's Play 3, and Bride of Chucky, and the most recent Chucky film, which is Seed of Chucky, which Don also directed. He is now in pre-production. He's written and will be directing the new Chucky movie, and they start production at the end of August. So you can ask him about that if you want to. Don has also worked on television. He's worked on Tales from the Crypt and Cellar Dweller. So both these guys have worked both in film and in television. So they have a lot of stories to share on both counts. Right to Don's left is Justin Lader. Justin, I'm pleased and proud to acknowledge, is a former writing student at UCF. He was a student of mine back in 2006, I guess it was, right? And after graduating UCF, he went to LA and at the AFI. And in a very short time, Justin managed to get a CBS pilot, a sitcom pilot written through Ashton Kutcher's company, and now is in pre-production on an original script that he wrote that is about to be, they're casting it and they're about to be shooting it, and it's being directed by Charlie McDowell, who was a classmate of Justin's at AFI. So it helps to maintain your network and contacts from film school. So these three guys hopefully will be able to illuminate you and educate you on the foibles of screenwriting and the rewards of it as well. So let me start by just to get a sense of where you're coming from, how each of you got started might be helpful to those of you in the audience who are about to get started. Mike, do you want to go first?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess the beginnings was when I wrote a poem for my 8th grade class, and my brother stole it and had it published in his high school yearbook under his name. And so that was the first incident of. Anyway, after that, I figured I would try to get my own name on things. I was in a new wave band that really never got out of the garage, and so I just decided I needed to do something more on my own, and so I wrote a script and started applying to film schools and ended up at UCLA and won a couple of awards just within the school, and that led to me getting an agent, and I pitched something with Catherine Hardwicke, who's now directed the first Twilight movie, and she was my first writing partner, and we sold that. It didn't get made, but it just was this sort of long burlesque climb up and down the Hollywood ladder. I took any writing job I could get. Some executive's son wanted to write something about time-traveling Neanderthals. So that was better than the job I had and 2 buses I was taking to get to school. And so I wrote that in a week and got paid $1,000 or something. And I just was trying to learn my craft and as quickly as possible. And then I got hired to do an action film for a low-budget company, and it got shot. It was called The Human Shield. It's pretty bad. But the executive liked the draft I did, and she hired me to do a sequel to a horror movie, which Barry mentioned, called, it's a giant rats attack a college campus kind of film called Gnaw, Food of the Gods Part 2. H.G. Wells would certainly be rolling over in his grave if he saw even one frame of that film. But that led to another job, and Curious George, and then The Mask came up, and then when I was in between jobs and had graduated, a friend of mine from film school, because it's pretty important to get feedback from the people you trust who are also writers. We just decided we'd seen a bunch of kind of bad action post-Die Hard movies that all seemed very cloney, and we just were wondering why the bad guy couldn't be as interesting as the good guy in an action film. And then we decided, well, why can't the bad guy be the good guy? And that ended up being Face Off, and that the hit status of that film and having two good actors be in an action film just sort of, led to everything else. So that was kind of the beginning. Just trying every different avenue to, not be a file clerk at the law office that any longer was a primary motivation. Also, being cut off from your parents doesn't hurt.
I started out, actually, I was an English major at Columbia University. And I knew that I wanted to get into film, but I wanted to have a bit of a liberal arts background first. And they have a great film school at Columbia, but as an undergrad, you were kind of limited to what your access to it. It was more of a graduate program. So I just got sort of frustrated. I just wanted to get more into film more quickly. But took a year off from school, and I got my first job, actually, in show business was as a cable puller on a soap opera in New York called Search for Tomorrow, which is now defunct, but at the time was, I think, the longest running soap opera or something. And I was literally the low man on the totem pole. And I'm sure you guys are, as students, familiar with 3-camera video production. And on the show, all the various sets are lined up around the studio, and you just go from set to set to set throughout the day, and it is somebody's job to make sure that the cables on these 3 video cameras don't get tangled. That was my job. It was very unglamorous, but it was completely thrilling to actually have a job in show business. And I met a lot of people there, met actually even an actor who I ended up casting in Child's Play 2 and 3, like 10 years after that. Which is incidentally probably a good lesson for everyone, to always be nice to everybody. This actor was very nice to me, the low guy on the totem pole, and I was able to give him a job later. Anyway, after that, I transferred to UCLA, where I met Mike in film school, and I gravitated toward writing, partly because I had a facility for it, but also because it was cheap. I didn't have any money, and I didn't really have any money to make films, so writing films didn't cost anything. So I did that, and after I wrote my first script, and I felt encouraged about it, and I wanted to write something else immediately, and this was in the mid-'80s. Cabbage Patch Doll craze was very popular then, and being a lifelong horror movie fan, that inspired me to write Child's Play. And I was very fortunate that with that script I was able to get an agent, and that the movie got sold and actually made and was a hit. I mean, so it was really a very fortunate, perfect storm of events for me that led to my still doing these movies.
I grew up in South Florida, and I guess my way into writing was I did acting, because when you're young, you don't really understand that movies are written, but you're drawn to it. So the way in is acting, but I wasn't very good at it. And I remember in one of my acting classes, we all had to do these scenes, and mine was from Hamlet, and it was this long monologue, and I was very lazy, so I forgot to do it, and I didn't memorize it. And I remember convincing my teacher the next day to let me write my own version of the scene, and she let me. And so I guess my first way into writing was rewriting Shakespeare, and I realized it was received well, far more better received than any acting I ever did. So I thought, oh, I like writing, and from there I applied to the UCF Film School, and it's interesting because I don't know if it's still like this, but at the time, I think it's still pretty much still like this, but very independent-minded. You wrote, you directed, you shot, you produced, you did it all. And then after graduating, the plan was to just move to LA and try to make it. And it's actually and I was talking to a student in your class last night, a teacher at UCF who's still doing this. I recommend everybody do it. Is an internship. Bob Jones does it, and I did that. And at the company that I interned for, the producer was gearing up to make his first movie, and he asked me what my plans were when I moved out, and I said the idea of going to another film school didn't even occur to me. And he mentioned that he was an AFI graduate, and he had read some of the things that I've written, and I went from doing basic intern stuff like getting coffee and faxes to being asked to do coverage. And then by the end, because of I guess he was happy with the way that I did it, by the end of my internship, I was sort of given carte blanche to pick whatever script I felt was interesting and do my own coverage. And I was sort of stopped being asked to get coffee. So he suggested that maybe I apply to AFI. So I applied to AFI, and I got in. Now, AFI was different than UCF in the sense that AFI is very strict with disciplines. There's writing, directing, producing, cinematography, editing, production design. And whereas at UCF, you were able to sort of run the gamut and do what you want. At AFI, it was very focused. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to apply as a director or a writer because I really enjoyed directing at UCF. But then I thought, the idea of securing locations and setting up meetings, and I didn't want any part of that. So I thought, I'll go as a writer, and I ended up getting into AFI. And the short version of the story is at AFI, your first year as a writer, you have to write, they're called cycle projects, but they're basically just short films. And you get paired with the director, and you get paired with the cinematographer, and that's the way that it happens in orientation. And so I wrote a short film that a director had to direct, and it went over pretty well. And from that point on, the writer is able to go do their own thing. They don't have to participate anymore in these short films. And I still, because I wanted to work with directors and I wanted to be involved in actual filmmaking, I decided to, if a director wanted me to, still write their cycle 2 and then their cycle 3. And the cycle 3 project was an idea I came up with about an obsessive compulsive boxer. And he shot it, and it was received very well, and the faculty said for my thesis script for my last year at AFI, which is a feature-length script, as a challenge to see if I could adapt it. And I did, and that was what got me my first manager and agent. And so I guess the moral of the story is, if it wasn't for just some silly idea at a film school, I wouldn't have written my first feature-length script that ended up getting me my first bit of representation.
Great, thanks. As moderator, I'm going to try not to inject my own experience too much into this, but I just wanted to add in terms of how I got started too, because it's kind of an unusual story. I was a film student at UCLA Film School back in the early 70s, and I had written a script about the roller derby, which was kind of a subculture phenomenon in LA at the time. And the biggest star in the world at the time, female star, was Raquel Welch. And I thought this movie would be great vehicle for her, this kind of pop culture goddess playing a roller derby queen. And I got one of these maps to the star's homes and found out where she lived in Beverly Hills, this mansion in Beverly Hills. I followed the map, took the script under my arm, followed the map up to her house, and parked in front of her house. It was not gated. I just went up to the front door, rang the doorbell, and her assistant answered the door. And I said, "Hi, I know this is highly unusual, but I'm at UCLA Film School, and I wrote the script for Raquel Welch. Would you give it to her?" And she said, "Well, it's highly unconventional. I don't know, but I'll read it, and if I like it, I'll give it to Raquel." And a number of weeks went by, and hadn't heard, so she left me her phone number, and I called her, the assistant. She said, "Well, Raquel was a little bit concerned that you just rang the doorbell and all that, but she does like the title of the movie, which was The Kansas City Bomber." So I thought, well, I've got to sort of make amends. I'm leaving out, the scene's deleted in the story, but for time's sake, I'll make it brief. I wrote her a letter, and just a very heartfelt letter that said I wrote the script for her, and I just think she'd be great in it, and da da da. And she got the letter, and obviously whatever the letter, I probably spent as much time writing the letters as I did the script, but she clearly, the letter moved her to read the script, and she loved the script, and the movie was made, and did very well. So that's how I got started, and that from then on. But I wouldn't advise that.
Don't do that.
I wouldn't advise that today. There have been, in the era of stalkers, but at that time was a more innocent time, I suppose. So anyway. But what I'd like, because all these guys have talked about their beginnings and how they got started, I want to talk a little bit about contemporary screenwriting and the conflicts that we deal with today in the business, and how, well, Justin can give a different outlook on this, but particularly with Mike and Don, how you think the business has changed in terms of the role of the screenwriter from the time we all got started. How would you assess the changes that have been made in the business?
Well, I think the biggest change now is that, what's really driving the movie business now are brands. And they want to make sequels, they want to make adaptations of comic books and video games, sometimes novels, but only if they're incredibly popular. I think that's right now the biggest change from when we started. It seems to be more difficult now to get original material going. That's my experience and perspective.
It seems that way. Everything is always this like big roller coaster of trends, but yeah, of course, all you have to do is look at what's coming up, starting on May 4th with the Avengers. The wave of summer films, and there's a massive trend toward remaking everything and more comic book adaptations, because those things sell extreme. I think that the shift started when the international market opened up for films that were less dialogue heavy and less sort of American focused, but action films, kidnapping films, superhero things play very well around the world, and so a film can not do that well here, like John Carter or something, but still, because it's got a lot of visual effects and things, it does well overseas, and the studios can recoup, well, not in that specific example, but can recoup some of their losses or even turn a profit. And so it does seem like there is less. I think the executive ranks are more fearful of original things. You tend to need more attachments of movie stars or A-list directors before things move forward than it used to be. When Don and I left UCLA, there was a flood they were really looking to film schools for original material, and the spec market was massive, and it seems a little more entrenched now.
On the other hand, though, I would say that the horror genre, always has been, and I think still is a place where original material can get through, simply because they tend not to cost very much.
They're not star-driven either.
Right, they're not star-driven. You don't need to get those kinds of star attachments to those movies. So I think, for you guys starting out, if you have any inclination in that regard, although on the other hand, I don't want the competition. So, but seriously, horror is traditionally a way in for a lot of filmmakers. Coppola started with a horror movie.
Dementia 13.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And also, I think, just to add on to what Don was saying, because of digital and not necessarily having film and being able to edit your movie in your house, of course, you can make extremely low-budget films, and not just horror like a Paranormal Activity or a Blair Witch Project or something, but you can make your own movie, and then the festival circuit. It's pretty exciting time for original concepts that can be made for the price of getting a couple of more credit cards.
Now, Justin, interesting from your perspective, just entering the business now, how do you see the role of the screenwriter in the meetings you've had in terms of the people you interact with, how
It's
you're
funny.
perceived.
The meetings is different because they'll never say at a meeting what we're saying right now. And the truth is, the thing that I was the most surprised about, sort of hit me like a bucket of cold water, was that the screenplay, especially when you're doing things through the studio system, the screenplay is almost the afterthought. It's about, and Mike mentioned this, packaging. It's about getting the actor that they want with the director that they want in the most economically feasible way. It's about, it has to be tested in terms of marketing and demographic before you're probably even typing fade in a lot of the times. And I thought that was pretty disheartening. Now, what I'm doing with my first movie, we got financing independently of the studio, and it's been a really eye-opening process in terms of casting. You know, we have my director, and I'm very involved in it in terms of who we want, who we can get, and our investors. You know, and this is how it is for all independent movies. They want to sell the foreign rights, and they want to sort of be able to make a profit, or at the very least get their money back before you even say action. And there's this very complex system with algorithms where you're literally plugging in an actor's name and it'll spit out what they're worth. I mean, it's horrible. And you almost sort of forgive actors that you'll read about having a diva personality because it's like they're treated like a product. But that aspect of it is a little disheartening, and it does sort of drain the creative fun out of why any of us want to be a screenwriter, when you'll have an idea of someone who's perfect for a role, but the people who are giving you the money say, great actor, doesn't give us any money in Sweden. And you're like, what? You know? So that aspect I found very, very surprising, and I'm still actually trying to navigate those waters even right now.
So
At some point, we'll transition to the ecstasy part.
Yeah. So don't mean to be depressing.
So we have a lot of Full Sail and UCF students in the audience who want to break into the business. What any particular words of advice you might give in terms of how they might go about breaking in?
Well, I assume since it's a screenwriting panel, I assume most people are writing, or at least writing with the intention of selling or writing and directing what you guys have written. But I mean, one thing is, of course, you guys are all out in Florida, and a lot of the money or resources are in LA or other places, New York or Canal Plus. But one thing to do is to get representation, and if you go on the Writers Guild of America website, they have a list of agents that accept unsolicited material, and that's a really good first step, is to register your screenplays with the Writers Guild so they have a copy of it, and so that gives you some protection, and then just start cold calling these agents after you've sent. I sent my script to you 2 weeks ago or whatever. And be really, really nice. A lot of the assistants are going to end up being agents soon. So call the assistants, see if the script arrived. Be friendly, be interesting, follow up. And, everybody has a different story about how they worked their way into the business. And hopefully many of you will have similar stories to share up here in future years.
Yeah, I think it's that tightrope walk of being persistent without being pushy. But I would say this, a lot of the sort of minefields that I've seen people step on that you can kind of navigate through is there's this sort of pressure to show a lot. But I think, and obviously feel free to disagree, I think one really, really good, great script is better than 5 or 6 good scripts. A lot of people that I know that came out of film school would have 6 or 7 scripts, and they might be good, they might be mediocre, but all it takes is one script really to get your foot in the door. So take the time and write a really good script and rewrite it until it's really good, instead of writing something first draft thinking you're done and going on to the next idea. one really good script is better than 5 or 6 mediocre scripts, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes, excuse me, I think that makes sense. But I think one of the pitfalls that we all fall into is because we have to think this way in order to do the work. You always think the thing you're working on is fantastic. And I mean, I certainly do. But it's just later that I realize how horribly deluded I was. So I mean, I think part of the key to what Justin is saying is you need to have a network of people that you trust to help you with that, because you can't operate in a vacuum, and you can't really fully judge that for yourself. You need to have, 2 or 3 fellow writers or fellow students, teachers, that sort of thing, to really serve as a sounding board. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I've heard so many stories that say the opposite as well. That like people, in order that someone got an agent because they had 3 scripts in 3 different genres, and they needed to show a breadth of ability. It's just everyone's experience is different. I mean, the logic of what you're saying makes sense too, but you just have to make damn sure that script is great.
And that's what you said about having a base of people that you trust. What I'm talking about more, I'm not saying spend 10 years writing your Citizen Kane. What I'm saying is, when I was at AFI, we all had to submit these bios. And to a certain extent, it kind of becomes a pissing contest because you want to impress your fellow classmates. But I remember reading one of the bios about someone who was roughly my age, which would have been 25 at the time that he was at AFI, talking, and in his bio, he's proudly mentioning that he wrote 32 screenplays. And I remember thinking, this sounds ridiculous, and so it's that, and I've gotten like cards from people that, whether they're coming out of film school or they're trying to break in, and the card will say their name, and it will say writer, director, cinematographer, producer. So there's this sense of overreach, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. And I think that to scale back and take the time to make something good. I mean, I agree with you. It is a tightrope walk. You don't want to spend 10 years just rewriting the same thing, and by rewriting the same thing, replacing a period with an exclamation mark. I mean, you do have to move on at a certain point, but I'm just talking about the overindulgence of just next thing, and saying, here, I have all these things for you,
I have to agree with what Justin's saying. I teach at UCLA in the master's, advanced screenwriting, the master's program when I have time. And the singular biggest mistake my students make is, it's a little different than in Barry's class. They have to write a full-length screenplay in 10 weeks. And then the next quarter, they have to write another one and another one. And these things do not get refined. And the biggest mistake they make is, I got an A in the class. Well, you got an A because you finished. And it's hard to write 100 to 120 pages in 10 weeks, especially when you have a part-time job or a full-time job and you're taking other classes and all these other things. And these scripts, and as Don said, well, I'm sort of the opposite of Don. I pretty much dislike everything I write, and I don't think it's great, and I'm second-guessing myself all the time. But it can always get better. And if you rush a screenplay out, you don't. And as I said earlier, if you're cold calling agents or a producer that has made several movies here in Florida, and you won't get a second chance. I mean, what Don said is totally true. Get the opinions of, not your mother or whatever, but someone that you trust who, you have a similar, these people that seem to have a good sense of the movies that you both like, and get feedback and keep polishing it. It can always get better. Even some sort of confused note like, I didn't think it was that funny. Is it a comedy? That's got to tell you something, right? So really, it is much better to have, sure, it's great to have a backup script if they say, do you want to see something else? And you can say, we love this action film, but, do you have a drama? Yeah, I do. It's just the first draft. You can always send that with a caveat, but it's really great to have something that's tight and that the reader just wants to keep turning the page. And one final note about that. no typos, no grammatical errors. Seriously, a lot of those readers are a shitload smarter than their bosses. And if they sit there and you've used it's improperly, or you type H-E-A-R instead of H-E-R-E because you don't have grammar check, just spell check, it's going to stop the reader cold. It's going to take you want that person immersed in your story and your characters. And if you got a lot of typos, and if you're not good with that stuff, but you happen to have a wildly creative mind, or you're dyslexic or something, have someone proofread it first. Really.
I really agree with that. I mean, when people would tell me that when I was in film school, I'd be like, what's the big deal? But you don't want to interrupt the flow of somebody who's reading your script to maybe pass it up the level to the boss. Because when I interned, I was the person reading the script, and a lot of times, first of all, the person reading the script wants to be a writer, so they're already sort of reading the script with kind of a chip on their shoulder. It's like, why am I reading somebody else's script and somebody's not reading my script? So you already need to sort of impress them, and as soon as they see it's without the apostrophe, they're going to be, I use that right? They're going to take that out. I mean, I was in a situation where I'm crazy with that kind of thing. I sent a rewrite of a script I was working on out, and it went out to casting directors, to go out to agencies, and I realized on page 43 I wrote accept E-X-C-E-P-T when I wanted A-C-C-E-P-T. And I called the director frantically. I'm like, you got to get all these scripts back. We got to send out a different email. And I did, and he laughed. But especially when it's an important scene, you don't want an emotional moment in the scene to happen, and then you see a misspelled word. It's terrifying. But yes, I agree with that.
It's so true. I just have to add to that. I mean, I can't stress enough in my writing classes when the commas are not in the right place or apostrophe. I mean, it sounds like a very basic academic process, but it's true. I mean, when you're reading a script, if the comma's not in the right place, it disrupts the rhythm of the line. If there's a line of dialogue, a line of description, and it can totally screw up the whole meaning and intent of the line.
Well, here's the equivalent. Imagine if you're watching a movie and in a really important scene, the boom mic just sits in frame for 5 seconds. That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
Strunk and White is your friend. It's a Bible, and I mean, it's just like anyone learning a trade. A carpenter has to learn how to use a hammer and nails. I mean, the very basics of grammar. But it is amazing how people kind of can just shrug that off and think that they're somehow above it. That because I have such a great story, and my mother told me this, and my friends tell me it's a great story. But you just have to make sure that you know the nuts and bolts of your craft.
We've been talking about film school here. We're all graduates of film school. How would you say the film school experience has benefited you as writers, and how might film school students in the audience use film school to benefit their own careers?
I think that's like the $1 million question. I mean, usually you're asking two different things with that. The first thing is artistically, am I becoming a better writer? The stories that I'm telling, am I improving? A lot of the times, people tend to care more about the second part of that question, and it's practical. How do I go from film school to working? And sometimes they're two completely different things. I would say both those things, film school was instrumental. I mean, to me, I recently looked back and read one of the first things I wrote. It was actually in your class, and there are a million things I would have done differently, and I was cringing. And you can't measure it. It's sort of like when you first get your driver's license and you're driving, you're probably not the best driver in the world, but you don't realize 2 years later, I'm a better driver right now. You just sort of get better at it. So I think film school is important at the very least, because if you're there for writing, it's forcing you to write. You're forced to write. Now, the other question is, from a practical standpoint, well, I mean, I sort of told my story, and that's, if it wasn't, you could trace it back to its source really easily. If it wasn't for UCF, I would have never done the Bob Jones internship. If I didn't do the Bob Jones internship, I would have never gone to AFI. If I didn't go to AFI, I would have never written my first script, which means I never would have gotten a manager. I never would have gotten an agent. I never would have been able to pitch the TV show and sell that. I wouldn't be making my first movie now. So, I mean, that's not to say it wouldn't have happened some other way, but you could trace all success that I've had, if I've had any, back to film school. So I think it's important.
The community the sense of community that you get and the relationships that you form. I mean, we all know each other from film school, and people come up in the business at the same time. So, I mean, in addition to all the things you said about how it just the practical benefits of going to film school, I think the relationships and that sense of community, for me, it was really thrilling, and I look back so fondly on those days.
I agree with what both were saying, what both Don and Justin were saying, and I would just only add that for me, the thing about film school, because I'm a major procrastinator, it was the discipline. I mean, having to have deadlines. Film school, for me, operated like a studio system where, I mean, even though I wasn't getting paid, I was paying them. But when you have a job, say you sell a pitch or something to Paramount, well, you have a contract and you have to, you've got a month to do an outline, and then you have 8 to 10 weeks to do a first draft, and then you have X number of weeks to do another draft. Well, film school operated that way, where, you come in, you have your story, and then 2 weeks later you have, your 3-page beginning, middle, and end, and then a week later you have a step outline, and then you have to turn in your first act, and then by the end of the quarter you have a script, and then you spend the summer or Easter break refining it. And so it provided an enormous amount of discipline for me, and I learned how to write quickly. I mean, I wrote The Mask in 6.5 weeks, and half of it was while I was, helping plan my brother's wedding. And so it's a good thing. And as Don said, that the community aspect, you meet people, even if you're not in film school. I mean, you meet people, and after we graduated, we met once a week at a mall and talked about what we were doing and said, okay, next week I'm going to be doing, I'll have this to show you. And it keeps you working. And the more you're working, the more you get invested in your characters and your story, and the more it begins to take over your life. And it's all about your passion for what you're writing, and if you have that, then it's going to show on the page, and hopefully other people will see that when they read it.
Yeah, I mean, basically you're going to school to talk to passionate people, just as passionate as you are, about movies and write movies and see movies. I remember the best times ever in your class, like your Scorsese class, where our class was to watch Martin Scorsese movies. And by the way, you sort of are able to figure out which are the real people that are there for the right reasons and the people that are there for the wrong reasons. Because I remember, we did a back-to-back Goodfellas casino night, and there were kids complaining that they couldn't sit for a back-to-back movie. I'm like, what are you doing here? And and you mentioned something about film students worrying about grades. I had that too. I would have students that were in my class going up to the teacher talking grade questions. You're in film school. If you're worrying about grades, do you think you're not going to get a rewrite job at Warner Brothers because you got a B- in Foundations of Story? They don't care. You should be dedicating your time to engrossing yourself in movies, talking about story, seeing a terrible movie on a Friday night and arguing why it was terrible with someone who's telling you that it was really good. I mean, that's what film school is. That's what you should be doing.
That's good. We're approaching the halfway point before we open it up to questions. I know that all of us on the panel are screenwriters, but we've also written for television. So I just wanted to open that up a bit in terms of the experience of writing for television, how it might differ from movies, and how a screenwriter might also straddle between the two. So you want to talk a bit about your experiences writing for TV?
You have the most TV experience. You go first.
Yeah, Mike, you created and produced a whole series. So.
TV is great. It really, of course, the thing about television is it focuses on character and less so on plot, really, and also the writer has a lot more authority. When I was just so happy, even though my show on natural history only lasted for 13 episodes, I got to explore a lot of things that I really wanted to say in 13 hours. And when I look back on the 2 years I spent on that show, that's kind of the equivalent of 6 movies. And so as a creator and executive producer of your own TV show, the executives that you're dealing with don't look at, I mean, you're more important than the director. I mean, the director, there were 8 different directors on the show. I mean, those people come and go, but you stay and you're the vision, and they look to you to provide answers. I mean, of course, you have to deal with a lot of notes, and some of them great and very helpful, and some of them, like, you have a big, massive question mark over your head, and you're trying to figure out how to respond. But TV is just, I mean, I'm thrilled with the idea of working in television again, and even Don and I are developing something that Don created, and hopefully we'll be able to sell that this summer. But and then on the other hand, the Tarzan experience wasn't very good. It was, Warner Brothers wanted to make this. It was on the WB, and if anybody saw it, you know how bad it was, really bad. I mean, we had a different vision for the show, which was a lot younger and edgier and weirder, and we did not want to do the Johnny Weissmuller or Disney version of it, where you've got some big muscle guy who's like sort of lumbering around, and of course they ended up casting an Australian Calvin Klein underwear model in the role, and it didn't work. It just was kind of dull. So I walked off that, but I learned a lot from the experience, and I think there are a lot of really good things on television. There's so many different channels now, so a lot of opportunities in TV.
Yeah, my experience in TV has been much more limited. I a long time ago did an episode for Tales from the Crypt, but that was really an anomalous kind of situation. Because it was like being hired to, literally it was adapting a comic book story, but it was almost like doing a short film, because it didn't really function, because it was an omnibus kind of thing, standalone episodes. Other than I sold a pilot to ABC, which didn't end up going forward, but through that process I did meet a lot of people that I hope those relationships, that might be useful to Mike and me when we try to sell this new thing. But I don't want to steal your thunder, because it was like something we were talking about at breakfast, and I'll pass it to you. But you were talking about how in features, story is paramount, but in television it's really much more about the characters.
Yeah, I mean the way that they look at it with TV, and the show that we sold the pitch to was on CBS, which is America's most watched network. I mean, you're in the belly of the beast, and they take their development very seriously. And the way that they view sitcoms, especially, was these characters are in people's living rooms because they're their friends. So it's very important to create these dynamic, likable, edgy, but not offensively. I mean, the guidelines are insane. But and the story that I was telling was, we had a very successful pitch because we took the time to really develop the characters, and sort of the story that I told you, do a little bit more than like a laundry list of adjectives to describe who these characters are. Like in the pitch, like one of the things that come to mind was we said to describe a character, he's the kind of guy who will have a one-night stand, but he can't help himself but engage the girl in pillow talk after. To sort of describe what kind of character this is. And then that was just a description. And then when we got notes back on the pilot, it was like, where was that scene where he has the one-night stand with the girl and he engages her in pillow talk? And we're like, well, that's not the story. That was just a way to describe what type of character you're dealing with. So it's very, with TV it's different because there's the network, there's the studio, which is not the network, there's the production company that you're teamed up with, and then there's your agents and managers who are heavily involved because they're packaging it, because they're not coming in with a script that's done, they're coming in with an idea, so they're very involved in the process. So the tricky part for us was to not be in such a situation where you feel like you're writing to please everybody, because you're writing to please 4 different groups of people with completely different ideas of what the television show is going to be. So the biggest thing that I took away from it was write what you think is best, and don't try to guess what other people want to see, which I also think extends to a feature-length movie that you might want to write. It's very tempting to read in the trades what sold, what's it about, what kind of pitch was it, and then say, oh, I want to write a movie like that. And I think as soon as you do that, please disagree, but I think as soon as you're writing something based on what you think other people want to see, you're sort of dead in the water because you're not really doing it for the right reasons.
That's a very good point. I wanted to address that. But I just want to add in terms of television that every network, and there's so many networks now with cable, has their own specific demographic. Lifetime has their demo, TNT has their demo. So
Right, Justin was talking specifically, you had a specific experience at CBS.
Right, and
which would be a very different thing than Stars or HBO.
Right.
There's so many different places
Right.
that CBS, because it's one of the major networks, of course they're going to demand that your character be edgy, but not too edgy. But there are other places where
It's unwritable, but
they want you. Where there are one of the great things about the frontier of television that's just exploding. There's so many new venues for ideas, and arguably, I would say even more than in feature films now. And it just seems like it's a world where they really welcome a new voice, a fresh idea, the sort of character that you thought maybe, probably, CBS or ABC or NBC may not be able to go forward with it, but there are a lot of other places that will. Then the flip side of the coin is that if HBO, they're going to have a mandate that you have to have sex and you have to have bad language, literally. Or if you
that's
ever
my
watch,
creative mandate too, by the way.
If you ever watch programming on FX, it really becomes hilarious because you can see that they're just reveling in their ability to say fuck, and so everyone will say it literally every 3 lines.
Yeah, I do want to. I do want to reiterate though. The CBS experience was us, because of everything that we heard, trying to make something make something. It probably wasn't based off other people's expectations. There weren't many direct notes that were the kind of notes that you see that make you want to pull your hair out of your head. We sort of did it to ourselves. It was an amazing learning experience. We would do it completely different now. Obviously there are those little laughable moments, like edgy but not too edgy, like what is that? Egging somebody's house and then helping them clean it up. I don't know what that is. But it wasn't an experience where it was actually really pleasant, because you hear all these horror stories. And for a network like CBS, it was really pleasant. The people that we worked with were really smart, and they were really nice, and they wanted to make a really good TV show. We just sort of had an idea of what CBS was, what CBS Studio is, and what our production company was. And we were like, maybe we could have our cake and eat it too. And it became a mishmash of ideas that probably we should have just picked one direction and went, and instead we tried to combine it all, and that was the downfall.
I think it's also helpful to look at, don't look at the top of the ratings if you study, what networks or cable channels are doing well, but look at the bottom. And I know when it came up that Cartoon Network was wanted to move into live action, and I got an enormous amount of advice like, don't go in there. Why aren't you going to, CBS or Disney XD or Nickelodeon or MTV with this kid show idea? Why? They've never done it. And I said, exactly. They are much more open-minded to hearing new things. And so I went into the, kind of the lowest level thing, and they developed, I think, 18-hour-long scripts that season, and they shot 2 of them, and mine got on the air. And so I'd rather have something on the air with a lot of product, with less people watching under the radar, than just have written a script that's sitting on the shelf.
I like to double down on that too. Look no further than Mad Men on AMC.
Well, I was going to say the quality of TV is extraordinary.
And the same executive, by the way, moved over to Cartoon Network from AMC and Mad Men.
AMC was a network where you could watch Godfather 2 5 times a day with commercial interruption. But they had an idea, and it could have gone to another network, but they decided to take a chance, and now AMC is a top-tier network for quality storytelling. So I think that's great advice. I really do.
Yeah, and in terms of quality, I mean, I can't think of a movie last year that was as good as any episode of Homeland or Mad Men on TV. Anyway, I'd like to open the floor to questions too, because I'm sure a lot of you have questions. So, you want to raise your yes?
I've got one question for Don.
Yeah.
But your answer really is predicated on the first part of the question. Did you see the most recent horror movie that's out there now, Cabin in the Woods?
I have not seen it yet, and someone spoiled the ending for me.
Okay, then we won't. then we won't talk about it.
But did you like it?
Yeah, I thought it was a wonderful satirical effort on horror movies, much like
Scream.
Scream
These
was.
guys have all seen
much like Scream was with the slasher movies. This did with horror movies, and it was almost making fun of the genre all the while it was scaring you. And
Did you find it scary? Because that's
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, it unleashed every single fear that you may have in your nightmares all at one time, and made you laugh at it while it was scaring
That
you.
sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was. It truly was.
Well, I have a question about the role of a writer now, and you have like the internet now. Do you think that there's going to be a big future for like web series, like the Guild and web therapy?
I think it is the future. Anyone else?
Well, I guess
Wait,
that's all I got.
what was you're talking about for television shows?
Well, I guess like just creating original ideas, like again with the Guild. I mean, it's just a perfect idea to have like one big 30-minute episode spread over just like 5-minute sections.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think there's something to say that anybody can do that. Not from a quality standpoint, but anybody who wants can film something and put it on the internet. And what that does, obviously, there's a worry of oversaturation, and there's a level of difficulty in shouting louder than all the other stuff around you to get people's attention. I haven't seen a version of it that has worked and has remained on the internet. I've seen things that have become internet sensations because of a certain level of quality, and from there it got developed into a TV show or a movie. I haven't, like whether it's Mad Men or The Sopranos or a movie, it exists as a movie or it exists as a TV show. There hasn't yet been a cultural phenomenon like any of those things that started on the internet and stayed on the internet.
But once that happens, it's the cascade will be massive. I think.
Yeah.
There's still going to be the audience that's going to want to go see a Prometheus in a big screen and in a major big theater. So I think that's going to open up to a lot of different venues for your work, whether it's the internet, whether it's cable, whether it's feature. Where? Yeah.
I'm a music composer, and I work in the television commercials and film and television business doing that as a full-time job. But as a filmmaker, I'm kind of new, and I've never really made any of my own films, and I'm doing that as an originally. And when I meet people in the industry, I'm like, well, should I tell them I'm a composer and try to get a job, or should I say, hey, I want to break into the film business as a filmmaker, and then say, oh, you're one of those? So, I mean, how do I present myself, or how do we present ourselves as filmmakers, so that we can, obviously present ourselves professionally without saying, oh, I'm a jack of all trades, which you kind of have to be.
Well, you're not a filmmaker until you've made a film.
Right.
So, I don't know. I would say make a film, and then you call yourself a filmmaker. Even if it's a 5-minute.
Yeah, I mean,
short.
do you?
I
do you
would
want
say
to be a producer, or do you want to be a director?
Actually, my
writer?
son and I work together, and he's wanting to be a director and is wanting to go to film school and the whole thing. So I'm kind of the producer. I've been in post-production and all kinds of stuff in video as well. So I'm kind of a producer, sort of thing, and we're already making short films and have been making some stuff. So we're getting towards to the point where maybe we'll make a series short or maybe even a feature in the coming months and years. And so I'm kind of strategizing the best thing to approach the industry.
Well, I think the clearest advice would be to use your position as a composer of film or television or TV commercials or whatever it is you do to use those I mean, we all started off, or certainly Don and I started off doing other things. I mean, Don was a cable puller. I was Helen Hunt's assistant on a couple of bad movies. I wasn't a writer and nobody looked at me like that, but I met people and, who saw me as a PA or whatever and had scripts and showed them to people. I don't think there's any, you're not diluting or diluting yourself by saying that I'm a composer, but, I've also done this now. I mean, you're in a good position because you know people who produce things and shoot things. And so that's your entree right there. It's fantastic.
Question back here.
I was curious. I had read about Face Off, the film, and the fact that
Who is it?
back here.
Oh.
Back here. With Face Off, that with John Woo, that you'd go ahead and give them the script, and then all he wanted to do is talk about story after like character arcs and things like that. And that would have been my conception. I would have thought he would have been more interested in action scenes and things like that. So is that kind of a misconception? Does that happen very often? You get the director that sort of gets story and character and wants to talk about those things, or is that more the rarity that happens?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what your question is, but I think I can answer by saying, in John Woo's case, having seen a lot of his films before even Face Off was written, and then when he came aboard, I mean, I think when I think it was Bullet in the Head or something, Michael Colleary and I co-wrote that script with, that we realized we'd written a John Woo movie. We had no idea we'd eventually direct the film. We expected what you just said, that it would be all about just about how we were going to storyboard the action scenes that we'd written in the script, or how he was going to alter them, or what he wanted. But it is true, for the first 3 or 4 months of prep, all he wanted to do was talk about the characters. And but that isn't necessarily that isn't necessarily the case. It certainly was not the case on Tomb Raider, where you really don't have any sense of who Lara Croft is in that film, in my opinion. So it's just director dependent. John Woo wanted this on the set every single day. If the actors were having problems with dialogue, or they were confused as to which character they were, which happened a few times, who they were playing, what role they were playing that day, we were always there to fix things. But that's a case where you have a very respectful director who considers the writer to be a crucial part of, a department head, like the production designer or the cinematographer. And so, but often directors don't want the writers anywhere near the set because they don't want to remind people that the story came from someone else. So.
But those are very strong words of wisdom that for any screenwriter out there, that in most cases the amount of creative input or not control, but input that you have on a film ties into how strong an alliance you can form with the director. So, I mean, the less threatening you can be and the more cooperative you can be, I think it's going to ultimately benefit you in terms of your involvement in the film. And I think all 4 of us can attest to that. Anyway, you had a question down here?
Yes. I was going to ask you about picking an agent, and did you guys feel like you actually got to pick your agent, or is it more about an agent picking your...
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's important for all of us.
My first agent, no. I mean, getting a first agent is just like such a major milestone and plateau. And everyone, it's different for everybody. I was in film school and I had written Child's Play while I was a student. at the time I was living in a house with 3 other film types. But they had all graduated. They were a little older than me, and one of them was working as an assistant to a television producer at Orion, which doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, she passed the script on to her boss, who read it and liked it, and he passed it on to his agent, who read it and liked it, and that's how I got my first agent. And everybody's story is different. I mean, but for me, this is like, oh, I have an agent, but I mean, that was just an opportunity that I happened to have. I mean, what was your first story?
Well, I found it kind of difficult to get an agent, and I didn't know about the Writers Guild, even though I was living in LA then, about the unsolicited, the list of agents that would read material cold from people. But I had Catherine and I had took a trip together and we wrote a script, and we sort of sent it cold on UCLA letterhead with a cover letter to a couple of studios, and we got some attention, and they didn't buy the script we wrote, Road Girls, but they really liked the script, and they hired us to adapt, not to adapt, but they hired us to do a comedy that they had a poster and a title for, but no movie. And so once we had that job, then we were able to get an agent. So the job actually came first, which sounds like similar to...
Yeah. I mean, I had managers first, and it's funny. It's like, I mean, let me say, I think you do need agents to function, but it sort of seems like when you need an agent, you can't get one, and then when you can get one, you're sort of people can get to you, so you don't need them. It was the kind of thing where it was pretty evident that we were going to team up with a production company, and there was a good chance that we had to sell the TV show. So we were in a situation where we sort of had our pick, and it was surreal to ever be in that position. But you remember when you're having these meetings where they're asking, where you could sort of go where you want to go, you also keep in the back of your head, it's because they want to make a commission and you could probably sell a TV show. So you have to ask yourself, what's going to happen if the TV show doesn't go? What's going to happen in 2 years? Are they still going to be passionate for me? And you also want to keep in the back of your head, before there was a chance I was going to sell this, the material didn't change. It was the same material that they probably wouldn't have looked at 2 weeks ago. It hasn't changed at all. But now that there's interest in it, all of a sudden, this is the best thing they've ever read. So it is sort of tricky. I was lucky in the sense that my relationship with my managers is rock solid, in the sense that we're friendly. We could go out and have drinks, and so that they'll make sure that you make the right decision picking an agent, and if you have a solid manager, they'll probably protect you.
We should talk about that after.
I think we should talk about that. Look, I think you definitely need representation if you're just starting out. Well, even if you're not, but just starting out. I mean, when I was starting out, I actually went to the Writers Guild and got that list of agents, and just started making calls who would read unsolicited material, and narrowed it down, made a lot of copies of an original script I'd written, and actually got it to ICM, and got a phone call early one morning, 7:30, 8 o'clock, that, and I was still at UCLA Film School, that, hi, this is Jeff Berg, I'm at ICM, and he was a lower level agent at the time. I loved your script. Can you get over here in an hour? And I, just jumped in the car and went over there and signed on the spot, which is rare. And I was, ended up, he was my agent for the next 18 years. But an interesting phenomenon, I don't know if it's a phenomenon, but an interesting change has happened in the last few years, and that's the role of managers. And I think managers can be easier to get than agents, and can be very advantageous because managers can attach themselves to your material as producers, which agents can't do. So a lot of managers are much more willing to read new material because if they find a script they like, they can not only represent you as a client, but they can also attach themselves as producers to the project, so they can have that Yeah.
And not to get too complicated, but if you're doing television, if an agency is directly responsible for packaging the TV show, they also sort of waive their commission, so it's the equivalent of having a manager attach themselves as a producer. Not to get too technical, because typically, if a manager attaches his or herself as a producer, they waive their commission. And at least from our experience with the TV show, with an agency, if the agency is responsible for packaging the television show and the show goes on, that you don't have to pay them too, which is obviously enticing.
And one more bit of advice. I really encourage you guys to find out who the junior, just hired, just promoted from assistant position agents are, because those are the hungriest people, and you want to build your career, your new career, along with that agent. And that can be a really good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other option in terms of getting your material out there, because no production company or studio is going to read your material unless it comes through an agent manager, and the other option is a lawyer. I mean, sometimes they will read it coming through a lawyer because they're protected legally. So if you really want to get a script out there, and you're having trouble getting an agent or a manager, you might consider the third option, which is an entertainment attorney. Anyway,
Question back here.
Question?
Yeah. Hi, this is a two-parter. I was just wondering, as a screenwriter, what's the worst part of the creative process for you guys, and how do you work past that?
Procrastinating.
God, the worst part.
For me, the worst part, I love the writing. It's when you finish writing and then it goes out there to be judged. That's the worst part, waiting to hear people's responses.
I think the worst part can be deciding to take a day off. And I know everyone, especially if you're starting out, you all have a lot of other things to do, kids to take care of, or grandparents to take care of, or full-time jobs and personal problems. But I think the biggest problem I've ever had is saying, oh, I'll work on it tomorrow. And then tomorrow turns into 2 days, and 2 days turns into a week, and then it's a month. And then you're still sitting there with 25 pages, and it's, you really need to let it consume you. And if things are overwhelming your life, you still need to get into bed with whatever you've written at the end of the day, no matter how tired you are, and look at it and force yourself to write one more page every single day. Because then the opposite happens. Then you wake up the next morning and you've had a great idea, and you skip breakfast before your work because you're piling it on. And the great thing about writing is it's not about you forcing yourself on the story and the characters. It's the characters enforcing and infusing and insinuating themselves into your life. And that's like that's the great thing about being a writer. And the more you can nurture that that's, for me, that's like
I always
the
find
best thing.
The first act for me is always really daunting, and there have been times when I've just spent way too long rewriting the first act, going over and over again, because unlike a lot of writers I know who just say they just want to get a rough draft down, for me personally, I've always had a hard time doing that. But I find solace in this book that David Mamet wrote. Nothing political, Barry. It's not his politics, but his writing process. In his book on writing, he talks about how it's just such a beast that you have to tame, and you have to break it down into little components. And so Mamet counseled, when you're first starting on a script, your initial goals for the first week or few weeks should be very small, where you say okay, I'm going to write this scene today. That's all I'm going to do, and I'm going to let myself off the hook after I just write this scene. Even if it's after you've done your outline, say your opening scene is just a simple exterior establishing shot of a building. That's your work for the day. And then I feel okay, I did my work for the day. Now I can go on and enjoy my life and do the rest of the things I need to do. Then you come back tomorrow and do one more thing. But those things very quickly do pile up. And I just, for me personally, I find that to be a really productive process, because once I start accumulating pages, then my enthusiasm and excitement for the work starts to grow exponentially, and my fear of what is coming starts to dwindle more, because I start to, like every day you feel like the foundation that you've built, that you can trust it, because it's like if you just accomplish those small goals every day, but even if you do 1 page a day in a month, you're gonna have a first act. And for me, that's always like this big, plateau, and an important plateau to scale, is having the first act done and having the foundations of the characters set. Anyway, that works for me.
Something that I just discovered recently that works for me, that helped me a lot, because I could have a really good writing day, and then to reward myself, I won't write again for another month. My parents are here. I'm just kidding. I write all the time. But what I did recently is, if I have a good writing day, I'll start the next scene, and I won't finish it, and then I'll purposely make the last line of dialogue terrible. So because I don't know about you guys, but even when I'm procrastinating, I'll click open and I'll reread stuff that I already read, and if something occurs to me, I'll tweak it. I don't really consider that writing, because I'm just.
I do.
Well, okay, so basically what ends up happening is, if I'm thinking about taking the day off, I'll think, wait a second. If I get hit by a bus and someone opens my computer, that can't be the last line of dialogue I wrote. What I do is, what I started doing recently, I only just discovered this recently, and it really helped me, is do that. Have a good writing day, very quickly start the next scene, stop halfway through, and end with a terrible line of dialogue. That's my advice.
I'm a new student in learning how to write, and as you learn how to write, your teachers at UCF tell you that as part of the learning process, you should read your material out loud, preferably to other people who don't know you, not your mother or your aunt or anything. And what I find is when you appear in different places, like a tea house or something, and you read something that you wrote, and you have all this criticism, then all of a sudden you go back a week or two later, and someone else is reading their script, and it sounds just like yours. The question is, how close to the vest should you be with your own work? I know that you, Justin, proposed getting your stuff out there. I don't know what that means. So if you're out there just trying to be heard, and people then start listening to you, your stuff is gone. It's lost already. So I don't know how to.
Are you worried about someone taking your material? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. There's exceptions to everything, obviously. I've never. First of all, no one's better at sort of diagnosing who you're gonna trust than you. So trust yourself. And I think be smart about who you give your script to. I've never had an experience of giving my script to somebody and them ripping me off. Look, I know it happens. Like I said, there's exceptions, but typically, and I've been in a lot of film schools with a lot of workshops where the scripts get passed around. I just never seen it happen. I would say, you only want to be giving your script to people whose opinion you trust. So if you trust their opinion, you probably trust them. So stealing material is not something I would worry about, especially in a feedback thing. And the way that I even got my first manager, it was a friend of mine's boyfriend who I barely knew, who read my script and liked it, gave it to someone that he knew, who gave it to a manager. And people like the script. I don't know, especially in LA. If you're not writing the script, I know a lot of people want to be the person who discovered it. So they tend to be very vocal and supportive, even if they don't know you. I found this great script, you have to read it. I haven't come across really anybody taking credit for something they didn't write. Not to say it doesn't happen, I've just never come across it. I don't know if you guys have.
I have, but I mean, there are things that you can do to protect yourself. I mean, as you probably know, I mean, just register your scripts with the Writers Guild. And like Justin was saying, I mean, just be selective about who you're showing it to. I mean, that's, you know, real. I think those two things are really the only things at this stage that you can do to protect yourself. But at the same time, that's probably all you need to do as well.
And I also think that, I mean, at this stage when you're a brand new writer or, you know, neophyte at something, you've got a lot of shit to worry about. And having someone steal something that you've just finished should be really low on the totem pole. Worry about that when, you know, you've started to make it more. It just shouldn't be an issue whatsoever. You're going to register your script, it's going to get out there, and if you end up having a lawsuit with Paramount Pictures, then your name is out there.
Right, it's really when it becomes a real problem is when you have a success. Because it's when something is successful that suddenly people start coming out of the woodwork to take credit for it, to have a piece of it or whatever. I think at the stage that you're at, it's a little less of a problem, like Mike was saying. But there are still those things that you can do if it makes you feel better, and you should. I mean, you absolutely should register your script. It's, you know, it's not expensive. You can do it online. It's very simple, and it gives you peace of mind. And I know of a couple of examples, myself included, where the fact that it was registered, the Writers Guild did protect me. And I know of another writer also who got involved in a lawsuit on a movie that got this complicated legal situation, and the Guild protected her.
And you said this is something you're working on in a class, correct?
No, what I'm saying is not, for example, if you're writing and then this week you're presenting a certain number of pages before a group of other writers, and you present those 10 pages, and there's criticism and how you should correct it and so on and so forth. And then sometime down the line, someone else who's been at it longer than you have, you suddenly begin to hear his story written in the correct form and everything, and you say, wait a minute, you know, that's exactly what I presented 3 or 4 weeks ago.
I think the one thing you'd have in your favor if this is something that happened is you're in a workshop class, so there's other people that could confirm that, saying, yeah, this is your story, or they might even say, I think you're looking at this, well, you're a little too close, it doesn't seem like that's happening.
It's a very rarefied, highly unusual situation.
But the point is, the benefit is you're in a class, so you have other people that read your version and their version. Yeah.
But more important point that you brought up inadvertently is the benefit of having your script read aloud. And I urge this for any writing, any screenwriter or writing student, is to get in a situation where you can have your words, the scenes read aloud. It's going to be very helpful to you.
Especially if you're writing comedy.
To hear the dialogue. I mean, you can sit and write it, and even read it to yourself aloud. But when you hear other people write it, we do this in my writing classes all the time, and I think it's very, very helpful. Question? We have time for one more question.
One more question right here.
Can I ask somebody who hasn't asked a question?
We have one right here.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm a really big horror buff. I like bad horror movies, C horror movies, great horror movies. I've been really disappointed in them for the last couple of years because it seems to be a competition of how much fake blood you can pour on the floor. Lately, though, I've been kind of impressed with just the concepts of them just being genuinely horrifying. From Tales of the Crypt, you know, Child's Play, horror writers up there. I have a question. When I'm writing something just scary that terrifies me, how invested should I get into it before it becomes a hindrance, or should I just scare the pants out of myself just completely?
Yeah, scare the pants off yourself. I definitely. I mean, Mike said that's Diablo Cody back there. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you know, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, you're not going to make yourself faint, I doubt, or I mean if you what maybe cause yourself some sleepless nights or something. I mean that you could use that to your advantage. Like, I can't sleep. I'll write another couple of pages or something. Yeah, I think I wouldn't. You have to be, regardless of the genre you're writing, you have to be very invested in what you're writing and what your characters are going through. That's just axiomatic, I think, for any dramatic writing. But I think for horror, we were talking about this in Barry's class yesterday. I think it's so important that the concept needs to have subtext, and it needs to be some kind of metaphorical reflection of something that's going on in our culture and our world today that is disturbing to us. And I think that what you're talking about is like what you're saying, that you lament the fact that just a lot of movies that are just putting blood on the floor. I think I understand what you mean. It's just that they're only gory, but there's really nothing behind it that's very compelling. And I think that there are a lot of horror movies made all the time for some of the reasons we've discussed earlier, because they tend to be cheap, but they tend to be cheap, but they're also from a directorial point of view, they provide a lot of opportunity for style and visual storytelling. A lot of things that I, personally why I became interested in movies was telling stories visually. I think it's a great genre, and it's often really looked down upon. It's just certainly in my career, I'm absolutely used to people sort of regarding me and what I do as at best a guilty pleasure. People just often don't really respect the genre, but I think it's great, and a great genre. I think that there are, some of the best movies in cinema history are horror movies, and I think that there continue to be good horror movies made today. I mean, I loved Let the Right One In, and I liked its remake a lot. I loved the movie Orphan from a couple of years ago. I thought that was, to me, what was great about that movie, it was about the people. It was about the characters, and it was really played on the level of a psychological thriller. And for people who haven't seen it, I won't say too much about it and spoil it, because it's a really terrific story. But it's really, I cite it not just because I'm an orphan geek and I could talk about it all day, but I think it's really instructive because it's a movie about people, and it's really about what's going on in this family, and I really loved that.
Just about wrapping up, I want to end this with one of my favorite jokes, which is about a screenwriter, and I think several people will have heard this, but I think it says so much about a screenwriter today. And that is, screenwriter comes home one day to find his house up in flames. The fire department, the fire flames going all over the place. His wife is running around screaming, and finally comes up to him and she says, honey, what's wrong? What's wrong? She says, oh, honey, it was just horrible. It was horrible. I was at home. I was in the kitchen, and the phone rang, and I picked it up. It was your agent, and I was talking to him, and I didn't realize I had something on the oven that was burning, and I let it go, and it caught fire to the drapes, and the whole house started caught on fire, and I don't know where the kids are, and I don't know where the dogs are, and we've lost everything. It's horrible. It's horrible. And the writer looks at her wife and says, my agent called? So, anyway, I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank Mike and Don and Justin for their great words of wisdom on the panel, and all of you for coming, and good luck with your writing.
Thank you.
And on behalf of NCON and the Florida Film Festival, I want to echo those thanks to all of our panelists and to Barry for moderating, and thank you for being here.